Great, so we are live. I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm very excited to be joined by some incredible panel members. We're going to be talking about the importance of deforestation and conversion-free sourcing in the agricultural commodity space. But I personally am not going to touch on that in the introduction. I'm going to leave that to my esteemed panel members. But I am hugely excited to be joined by some leading voices working on deforestation, conservation and agriculture from around the world. I plan myself just to frame the discussions a little bit for the next hour by introducing climate bonds and the overarching programme I lead here on transition finance. So hello everyone, my name is Rachel Hemingway and I am the head of the transition finance programme here at Climate Bonds Initiative. So what does Climate Bonds do? Climate Bonds is a global non-profit that works to provide science-based definitions for green and resilient investments. So this means we provide clear and detailed guidance for companies and for other stakeholders that are looking to understand how to shift their activities and their investments to become more green and resilient. So the transition programme, that's a really critical part of the overall work of Climate Bonds, and it focuses on those sectors that are not so easy to change. It's not maybe simply a case of switching to a renewable energy source. There are a lot of different issues and different stages of change that are needed in these sectors. Agriculture is one of these sectors where change is more complex and the risk of maybe greenwashing and those incremental tweaks is quite high. So Climate Bonds, we started our work on agriculture over 5 years ago now, and we're continuing to develop and build more guidance that covers the whole system, from the inputs, from the production, which is a crucial part, to value chain decarbonisation and deforestation and conversion-free sourcing. So we're here today to talk about this last aspect of agriculture and commodity production, the deforestation and conversion-free sourcing of commodities, how to achieve it, how to demonstrate that you're achieving this, and why we need to achieve it. So with this, I would like to introduce our panel members who will be discussing this issue today. First up is my colleague, Reyes Tirado. She's our global agri-food lead, who is directing the work on these science-based definitions for deforestation and conversion-free agriculture alongside our other agricultural criteria. Reyes brings decades of experience working on agriculture and climate change globally, and we're very lucky to have her with us today. Our three panel members here today have all been involved in developing these deforestation and conversion-free sourcing criteria, and each brings specific expertise to the conversation. We have Neil Robb, who is the technical manager with the Accountability Framework Initiative and the Rainforest Alliance, and he is an expert in ethical supply chains, geospatial systems, and corporate disclosure around forest issues. So, say hi, Neil. We have Chunquan Zhu, Dr. Zhu, who is the head of China Nature Initiatives with the World Economic Forum and the Tropical Forest Alliance. Previously, he was with the IUCN and WWF in China and brings deep experience working in forestry and conservation in China. Last, but very much by no means least, we have Caroline, who is the co-founder and CEO of NADAR. So this is a crucial piece in the puzzle. They provide satellite monitoring and they are a solution provider for the regulation in the EU called the EU Deforestation Regulation. So we're going to have some time at the end of this 1 hour panel discussion. For any audience Q&A, please do drop your questions, any questions that you have, in our Q&A box, and I will try to keep an eye on that as we're going through. The running order for this today is that first up is Reyes, who will be introducing our new deforestation and conversion-free sourcing criteria. and then we will go to a question and answer discussion with the wider panel. So at that, can I hand over to yourself, Reyes, to walk us through these fantastic new guidance documents about how to source commodities without risking deforestation and conversion of ecosystems.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar. We're super excited to be introducing the new criteria that we have developed as part of the Agri-Food Transition Program. So, yes, I will briefly introduce the criteria with the main points, which could be then the food for discussion later with our very esteemed panel. So today I want you to take home three main points around these criteria. The why, so why it is so urgent and important that we have a deforestation and conversion-free agri-food system. The homework in the criteria. So what are the requirements that the entities in the agri-food space will have to take forward to be able to certify and to move this very important sector to be aligned with climate and biodiversity. And then the wins. What are the important opportunities, the admissible opportunities that entities can have from following these criteria? So first, let's go into the whys. Why is this important? It is very clear from science that there's no solution to climate change without ending deforestation. And the agri-food space, the agri-food system, is crucial in this because it is estimated by FAO that around 90% of the deforestation taking place in the last decades is actually linked to the agri-food supply chain. So it is really important that we tackle this as soon as possible. I want to stop a little bit on the science here because I feel everybody knows about transitions. We will talk about different pathways. We will talk about the need to align with 1.5 to keep the warming at 1.5 so that the planet continues to be livable, but we don't really stop so much to think what does it mean for land in this particular case. So bear with me. This graph is from the latest IPCC report. In the x-axis, you will have the years until 2050 when we have to be net zero across all sectors. And then on the y-axis, we have the percentage reduction in emissions that we need to tackle. You have the different sectors in different colors, and they all have different shapes on how this transition, the rate of this transition going to net zero. And you see in green, the line is for the land use. So what does it mean, this 1.5 transition for the land use change sector? And what it means is that we are very much behind, but the requirements for the land use sector are actually very stringent. Why is this? Because land needs to become net zero by 2030. So really very, very soon, in 5 years, a bit more. And it has to become a net sink after that, meaning that we need to absorb a lot of the CO2 that is in the atmosphere in land systems. And for this, we need to stop deforestation, of course, very, very soon, but also then start to restore and use this land to sequester carbon. We shouldn't forget that this is only thinking about climate, but of course, biodiversity is the imperative for a living planet. Without biodiversity conservation, we will not be able to inhabit this planet as we know it. So, having said that, I want to follow with the second why, because promises don't help. So I'm sure you know this report, Forest 500, published recently, that looks at the data on what commitments are there from the promises made in the New York Declaration of Forests in 2014. 10 years later, the news are not very good. So around 63% of the companies that set commitments do not have implementations, ways to demonstrate that they're doing enough. And 30% of those companies don't even have any commitments. So the progress has not been very adequate, let's say. Also, commitments are never enough, because without the accessible, science-based, and credible standards to increase this transparency and verification, it will not be possible to achieve it. And I just want to point here on the cattle sector, for example, 45% of the deforestation is linked to beef, but 65% of the beef companies don't even have a deforestation policy. You see the years here, it has been increasing. So there's some progress, but far from enough. So up to now, they're like the whys, the why this is urgent and the why we're not going in the right direction. But also in climate bonds, we want to contribute to make this positive, and there is positive change. So far, climate bonds has certified $300 billion in green bonds, in instruments, in financing that is going to those players that are doing enough across many different sectors. And we do this by developing standards and certification criteria for many different sectors, including agriculture. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. So this Agri-Foods Transition Program was funded in 2021 by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, and is aiming to accelerate this transition we need, in starting with deforestation. So we look at the agri-food value chain, simplify here, from the input to the retail, including producing and so on. And we develop different criteria for those. So we're developing production criteria, food value chain criteria, but we thought it was very important to have a criteria that touches only on the land use part, on the deforestation part. And this is what we'll talk about today. Doesn't mean that the other emissions are not important, but this one is only about the land use change. So we're introducing today the first global, accessible, and comprehensive science-based criteria to certify those best players in the agri-food space, entities that are already sourcing commodities that are free of deforestation and conversion of natural ecosystems. It's an opportunity for those best players to enhance their credibility and recognition. The developing of the criteria is coordinated and led by Climate Bonds, by our team in Agri-Food Standards, but is by not means only done by Climate Bonds. We're really lucky and really grateful to have the amazing support from 2 technical working groups that were set for this process. The technical working group and the industry working group. The technical working group, you see there are members, very important organizations in there that help us develop the criteria, but also reach consensus that is wide across the spectrum of different institutions working with us. And then there's also the industry working group, which also include many relevant players in the sector who help us get feedback into how these criteria can be more accessible and useful for the different entities across the sector. So we're really, really thankful for all the support across those months until now when we are presenting the criteria. So the homework. What are those criteria requirements? There's 9 points of requirement. 9 points of what the entities will need to do. I realize this is small. It's not for you to see, just to see the outline here. And I have selected 4 main points that I will talk a little bit more about. They're around the cutoff date, the classification of the origins of those commodities, and how do we demonstrate that they are deforestation-free. And at the core is traceability. We're going to talk a little bit more about this then. And then human rights, because it's also a blind spot of many of the commitments that have been done up to now. So the 3 main points, which are really the what of the criteria, is around the cutoff date. So setting a date that defines that after this moment, deforestation is not allowed within the supply chain. So any food that is grown in land that was deforested after December 2020 should not be included in the supply chain. This is in line with the guidance from the Accountability Framework Initiative, that is a consensus, a global consensus guidance, and is also in line with the EU Deforestation Regulation that will come into place very soon. The second point is around the classification of origin of the commodities, because depending on if it is high risk or low risk, there are different requirements for those commodities. There are 5 commodities that I have singled out here, which are always considered high risk because they are very prone to deforestation linkages, but also because they are part of the EUDR regulation, and we want to make sure that we are in line with those. But these criteria will be applicable to any other commodity, both high or low risk. At the center of the requirements is the traceability. So what do entities need to show to prove that their food is not being produced in land that was deforested? This is the geolocation. Basically, the production units need to provide the geolocation, the GPS data for the polygon where the food is grown. This is for high-risk regions, high-risk commodities. For low-risk commodities, the requirements are less until 2030, and they need to show proof of the origin to the country or producing facility. With these 3 elements, this is the basics of what the requirements, the commitments need to demonstrate. Then there are other 5 points in the criteria from 4 to 8, which are more around the documentation, the information, the demonstration, and the evidence that entities will need to provide. Includes issues around due diligence, the monitoring systems that need to be in place, the reporting, the verification. And there's differentiation between high and risk commodities. And then the 8th point is around third-party verification, because there might be proxies that can be used for commodity compliance when the requirements are singled out. For example, if an entity is trading with palm oil and they have a certification with a roundtable on sustainable palm oil, they might be able to comply already through that certification. The same with many others. And the final point on the requirements is around human rights. So the Fortune 500 report also singles out that only 1% of all the commitments across the entities that they analyze, only 1% include provisions on human rights, when it is a crucial element to include when we're dealing with issues related with indigenous peoples and so on and so forth. So we have included that at a minimum, the entities should recognize the principles and conventions around human rights and labor rights and so on, but also that when the suppliers are in the context of vulnerable groups and the smallholders, they should also be provisions around investments and capacity building. This is an important element that we don't want, and the technical working group was really focusing on not leaving this behind. Okay, so getting to the end, to the wins. What is in the criteria that will help entities shine in green? So how can we make this the distinction, the label that would really differentiate, and why? So this is the first label that we know of for whole entities that can claim that they are deforestation and conversion free in their full sourcing. It is aligned with the global consensus guidance from the Accountability Framework Initiative. And we have very lucky to count with members from the Accountability Framework Initiative in our technical working groups. These criteria would also support the entities that go through the process of the EU Deforestation Regulation. It is in line with that regulation, but expands into also considering natural ecosystems. And then this will apply globally to any agri-food commodity, so both high and low risk. The entities that can be certified with these criteria can be ensured that they are actually agri-food deforestation and conversion free. And then this will What will this do for a company, for example, for an entity? It will reduce the risk of not complying with global policies, because this, as we know, is the one that is going further. It will maximize the green credentials on the agri-food deforestation and conversion-free sourcing for that particular entity. And it will make that entity get ahead of competitors who are not already best players in the sector. So with this is the quick introduction into the criteria. There's a lot more to go through, but I'm sure we'll have time now with the panelists to go over the details. Get in touch. There's 2 emails there from our Agri-Food standards team and also myself, if you need further questions or you want to have further conversations on this. And with this, I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Liz. Thank you so much. That was brilliant, super clear. I do have one question for you. Sure. What types of companies can get certified, or which types of companies are you kind of aiming at with these criteria, and who will be the users? We've got the company users. Are there going to be anyone else that would be benefiting from these criteria?
So the criteria is targeting any entity from the farm gate. So not for the producers, they'll have their own criteria, different, but for any trader, processor, distributor, up to the retail, they could all certify that they are deforestation and conversion free with these criteria, but only within the agri-food space. So an entity will have to prove that they are agri-food, in the sense that more than 50% of the revenue are coming from the agri-food trading. But otherwise, it's for all entities for the certification. However, the criteria can also guide other institutions, like financial institutions, in how do they want to screen in or out the entities that are doing best in this space.
Great, very clear, thank you. So I'd like to open this up now. We have 4 experts in this space on this call, and I want to bring in some views and perspectives from the different people here today. So Dr. Zhu, I might start with you, because China obviously is a really interesting market. It's a huge market for agricultural commodities, and it also produces a lot of agricultural commodities. So just as a general perspective, what are people in China in the policy space particularly maybe thinking about requirements for traceability, requirements for due diligence in the forestry and the agricultural commodity space? And do you think that work like these criteria and these guidance documents would be useful and provide some guidance for the Chinese market as well?
Okay, thank you. And from China, I should say there are growing awareness about this issue. So more than 20 years ago, China joined global efforts to address this illegal logging, focus on the timber and the pulp paper, the forest products, introduce FSC, Forest Stewardship Council certification. And China now is already have like more than 20,000 company receive this COC certification. I think this growing interest and awareness in China. And also I think this the China like as promote the high quality, low carbon, green and the inclusive development. I think overall political commitment already there. And China also like fully implementing the UN SDGs and join this and support Paris Agreement, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and so on. So this is implementing the international convention policy, high-level policy commitment there. For the agri-food system, that not yet to directly like link their business yet, but recently they also have some good development. For example, the FACO and the Ministry of Ecology and the Environment, in collaboration with the World Economic Forum, Tropical Forest Alliance, and the World Resources Institute, and many other local NGO and international NGO operated in China, try to develop, do a research for a global green value chain strategic framework. So there are like 6 priority actions already identified. That's cover policy, like certification, technology, and business engagement, and also including, for example, traceability and due diligence and so on. I think this undergoing. I hope will be in the future have more commitment action from business, also from government sectors, also have the policies in place, and also in overall in general have increase of general public awareness, create a strong market demand from China. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chu. You mentioned the Global Green Value Chain Initiative. And that's something I'd like to touch on, because one of the solutions underneath that was technology. So I'm going to come to Caroline now. And as she's the CEO of essentially a technology company offering solutions in this area, and ask a little bit about what is the role of technology in supporting deforestation and conversion-free agriculture, and what you see is the kind of new frontiers that are being opened through technological advances right now.
Yeah, hi Rachel. Thanks also for having me here in the webinar. I'm happy to give also a more technical perspective into satellite monitoring also. And I would say that's also precisely the value I see, or we see with technology, that you can really you have the opportunity to really accurately monitor where deforestation happens, to really pinpoint, okay, which are actually the high risk regions you're looking at. And what I would say is really crucial there is to have a sound method behind your monitoring. Because, for example, for the EUDR, you have a very specific definition of what is a forest and then what is also deforestation. So you're just looking at the conversion of natural forest to agricultural areas. And you need to have, of course, a solid method to be able to identify this, and not just look at, okay, where was tree cover loss, but where was really actual forest cover loss. And this is where then, of course, different types of satellite data come into play. And this is also what we at NADA are focusing on. So really providing the sound data basis for assessing deforestation with confidence.
Thank you so much. And I'll come to you now, Neil, because I know that you've done a lot of work on ethical supply chains and forest issues, particularly around looking at corporate engagement and due diligence and sustainability. So in your opinion, what kind of companies would be most benefiting from this piece of guidance? Who do you think are the kind of key targets, and what type of guidance do they need from our work, which focuses obviously on the debt market and the bond market, but are there additional sources of information as well as the work that Climate Bonds has been doing that can help?
Yes, and I'd like to say thanks again for having me here today and being part of the process and developing these criteria. So in regards to what kind of companies this is particularly beneficial for, I think it was covered in Reza's original comments that kind of so many companies beyond the farm gate, beyond that production level, and with sort of complex and integrated value chains, there are many. It's very difficult to say what kind of companies wouldn't actually benefit from this kind of guidance, but I think that I could always point to the work that my organisation does, the Accountability Framework Initiative, AFI, as a source for kind of almost end-to-end guidance on ethical supply chains and how to kind of implement best due diligence practices. So the Accountability Framework's a collaboration effort with that helps companies and other stakeholders to achieve the critical transformation towards eliminating negative impacts of agriculture and forestry, while fostering positive impacts. And we do this by sort of setting out a practical roadmap for setting goals, taking action, and assessing progress towards ethical supply chains. This is part of a collaborative process that's done by our coalition that represents sort of the combined best practice positions from a whole host of sort of different forest and agriculture related NGOs. We provide a variety of, our 12 core principles split up into different action areas that will guide companies across the value chain and across commodity, from all the way from setting their initial goals, sort of through their management practices, setting their scopes and their commitments, on-site management, all the way through to reporting as well, which is, you know, ultimately kind of the what we are looking to see with the implementations of initiatives such as these criteria, is that companies are able to successfully and effectively and transparently report on their progress towards their clear commitments. So that's where I would point as a resource that would be very helpful for any kind of company looking to engage in these criteria. But it's not just, we're not alone in that. There are a variety of different resources that companies can go to. They can sort of look towards the things like the TNFD sector guidance. You know, there's the DCF toolkit, various SBTI flag targets as well, are all very, very useful resources and can apply to, you know, so many companies on facing this this transition towards DCF sourcing.
Thanks. I'm going to pick up, on one thing that you said there, which is the importance of collaboration. But Reyes, you want to come back on?
Yes, I just wanted to add something to what Neil was saying, which I think is very important. But your question was about which entities could benefit more. And I was just thinking that in the short term, you know, the EUDR, the EU Deforestation Regulation, is creating a lot of talk and movement into the sector. So I guess for entities that are looking into how would will they align with the EUDR when it comes into effect by the end of this year, so next year, how do they want to align? What are the systems they need to put in place? The criteria that we had developed can guide them through this process, because we're really aimed and you know, it was a process of figuring out what the main asks in the deforestation regulation, so that we can say that they would be assured that they will be able to provide those systems. I just wanted to add that little thing. Thank you.
No, it is a really good point, actually, that obviously not everybody is going to be able to implement this at the same time, and the priority companies will be those that are needing to meet this regulatory push. And this regulatory push is at the moment very strongly coming from the EU with the EUDR. And there are those, I think, 7 commodities that are covered by the EUDR. And this links to a question that we have in the Q&A. And I'll throw this open, but it might, Reyes and Neil, you may be the ones best to field this question. And it comes from Sylvester Bamkale, who I think I was on a panel with last year. And he says, do you have any insight on other commodities in scope for review to be considered high risk in future years? So the EUDR, they targeted their commodities, as Reyes said, because they're very high risk of deforestation. So this is, I'm not going to try and list them all, but particularly things like cocoa, cattle, soy, palm oil, paper and packaging, and another one, I think. So Are there any commodities that are likely to be included in future years? Obviously, for our criteria, as you said, it covers all commodities. So I'm assuming that Sylvester is thinking about the EUDR particularly. So are there any murmurings on the horizon about what might be changing in the EU? Neil, and then Reyes, and then Caroline and Chunchun, whoever wants to come in first. Neil?
I mean, I can jump in first. I would say I haven't heard of any murmurings potentially about what other commodities kind of may be considered high risk, especially in regards to EUDR. I think that I might actually pass this to Caroline potentially as with more of a focus on EUDR, but I think that the core ones that are presenting the highest risk right now are covered under this, with sort of cattle and soy, and of course there's sort of an increasing focus on commodities such as cocoa and coffee, but they are covered as well. So yeah, I'll probably pass to the other panelists on that.
I would jump right in there if it's okay. So regarding the EUDR, I mean, the rumors we're hearing, on the one hand, it's more commodities that might be included at a later point. For example, cotton or corn also, which has quite a deforestation impact. But then also non-agriculture commodities or more minerals, for example. I mean, we're seeing it a lot also in our deforestation analysis, all the mining going on in the tropical areas, also specifically in Western Africa, but of course also in the Amazon, Brazil, for nickel, but also gold. And what we're hearing is that those minerals might also be included at a later point. So this is like the commodity side. But then, of course, what they already kind of mentioned in the regulation text itself is further ecosystems, what is referred to as other wooded land, which is, for example, savannas or also wetlands that are now excluded by the EUDR as for now, but might be included in the future, or most probably will. Like, I mean, the Cerrado in Brazil has a huge deforestation, or has been impacted hugely by deforestation. The deforestation has actually increased, while for the Amazon it has decreased. So of course this should be included. I mean, for the DCF, for the climate bonds, it's already, these ecosystems are already included. So I would say this is also an opportunity for the entities being certified, that they can already prepare for further commodities and also further ecosystems to come, maybe also for the EUDR at a later point.
That's interesting, particularly on the minerals. I hadn't considered the trade in minerals to be covered under future deforestation regulations. So that is something that we should be keeping an eye on. I don't know if Dr. Ju or Reyes, you want to come in and no?
Yeah, I think at this moment, EUDR is mainly focused on these 7 major software communities, but address this deforestation and ecosystem conversion issue. We have to look the broader issue, cover, for example, mining, as mentioned, and also like other agri-food products, and even like hydro, like dams and other infrastructures. And you also like I think we need to look at the big picture in the future to address this like climate change issue, and not only focus on this like software community, but at this moment, this is highest concern. This is the priority. I think lessons learned can be applied to other communities in the future. Yeah.
So following from that and talking about prioritization, given that EUDR is obviously very EU focused, looking at China, what would be the kind of the priorities that Chinese companies would be looking at for importing into China and exporting from China as well, to make sure that their supply chains are fully deforestation and conversion free? And what are the opportunities in China for the DCF sourcing for companies and for investors there? Obviously, we're looking at what are the benefits for investors in these clear deforestation sourcing strategies.
Yeah, thank you. I think China, as you know, is like the biggest soil import in the world. I think that in that area, China play a significant role, and how to figure out like the deforestation and conversion, sourcing. I think this is really critical. So last year, World Economic Forum, Tropical Forest Alliance, we facilitated launching a task force for greening the global supply chain. So in June of the annual meeting of New Champions, so-called summer Davos. So at this moment have 9 company, Chinese and multinational company join these efforts. And also recently in last November, have this COFCO International, a state-owned enterprise trade business, major food agriculture product trade business in China, and also the Mengniu Dairy. They are signed a MOU to say sourcing DCF like a soil. I think this really very good like progress, and we hope in the future more Chinese company and also multinational company they are operated or do business with the Chinese company join this effort. Hope in the near future can have like a more commitment and action to source like DCF soils. And also, for example, beef importer. China is now become the first like beef importer in the world, and it's also expected growing like from Brazil and from other countries. And also the similar approaches, if we have more Chinese company join this effort to use this like traceability standard criteria and to like kick off the DCF sourcing of beef. I think that's also area. Palm oil, China is the second largest, like with European, with India. This is the major market. We would like also to see how more like a trade of certified, or like use this like climate bond. You develop the criteria to relate to third parties certification to say sourcing palm oil from DCF or like peatland conversion sources from Southeast Asia and other places. Yeah, this China can help a lot if the Chinese business commitment and take concrete actions. So not only make a commitment, but also really do it. I think this is really critical. And also we would like to see like China's policy also in place, and also the financial institutions can join these efforts to financially provide the finance incentives, like to help like the business move towards DCF trade of major community for into China. But as I mentioned earlier, the timber of forest products is really sourcing from outside China, manufactured, partially re-exported to Europe, North America, Japan, and Australia. The market demand is really partially outside of China, but that's a very good example and the lessons learned. But for the soil, it's mainly demand market consumption in China, but we really need to do like more awareness, like a policy, like a business, financial, and really like market-driven DCF, like a soil and beef. I think that's the priority probably. I think this standard, climate standard, can really help too. Yeah, thank you.
That kind of brings me to my next question quite nicely, is what is the role of the financial system and investors and also policymakers, but that's quite a big question on the policymakers side. So we'll start with the investors. What's the role of investors in pushing this, and how can investors support companies to move to deforestation and conversion-free sourcing? Is there a particular way that we can encourage investors to get involved? What's their role in this? I'll throw it open, but I might look to Reyes to kick us off with this question.
So yeah, this is a very important and very big question, and one I guess that we're all at many different levels trying to resolve. Like, for example, when you were asking before about the EUDR, what are the next steps? So yes, other commodities, but also there's a great call for also including guidance for financial institutions, because they have a very big role to play in driving deforestation. Actually, you probably all seen in the news in the past weeks reports about how they are financing the destruction of many tropical forests. So really, it is a very key element to include, and hopefully more policies, more global policies will include this in the future. In terms of tools, in this criteria we have developed is only for the entity, because at the financial level, we're still not there. However, many financial institutions that are funding different initiatives from those entities could use this certification to point towards where they are deforestation free and can incorporate that into their guidance. So I will leave it there, very general, in terms of not a specific financial instruments, but in general, the guidance that can drive this. And I would just add that on this report I was mentioning in my presentation at the beginning, Fortune 500, they include many financial institutions. And if the data from actual agri-food companies is not very positive, from financial institutions, it actually looks really, really bad. So it's like a very, very important movement that needs to happen in the market from the side of the financial institutions themselves. I'll leave it in that, and then I'm looking forward to hearing what others think.
Neil, you're muted, yep.
Sure, I'll just pick up from where Reyes left off. I mean, yes, definitely. You know, that there is a call for kind of more of these sort of reporting requirements and considerations for financial institutions in terms of what kind of companies they're investing in. And yeah, as we know, potentially with the EUDR, in a few years down the line, there is this consideration about, you know, having more of a reporting requirement for financial institutions. But as you say, we're not there yet. But I think that kind of our involvement in this process with the Climate Bonds Initiative and the DCF sourcing criteria, it's these sort of movements right now and developing these sort of scoping and screening tools for financial institutions and investors that's hopefully going to sort of facilitate the evolution towards that kind of more mandatory reporting. I think that's sort of how I see it. And that would like very much be what we're looking at as a very positive step in the right direction, because, you know, when financial institutions and investors are able to make are required very much to make these sort of appropriate choices and demonstrate how they've done so, then that's probably one of the most effective ways that they can be supporting, you know, agri-food businesses and companies in the supply chain, because there is this push, both sort of at the moment in a market sense, but going forward potentially, hopefully maybe more towards a mandatory sense, that would be very, very effective. I think in terms of, back to your question, Rachel, like what can investors maybe do to assess and support agri-food businesses are looking to transition towards DCF. Obviously, the DCF sourcing criteria that we've been developing, you know, this could really help investors or really guide investors towards undertaking really appropriate due diligence steps. And there are sort of many options now about for companies looking to for investors undertaking risk assessments for the kind of companies that they're investing in as well, and who they're looking to select for that. it's really important for any investor to understand, you know, best practice about the commodity and sector that they're looking to invest in. And again, there are plenty of resources on that available now more than ever. Maybe look towards the sort of the CGF commodity roadmaps for that. And companies should also really be aware of any DCF commitments that the companies they're investing have made. You know, Ray, as earlier you pointed towards the Forest 500 report and the performance on cattle with that. So it's important that any investments made are based on understanding of any DCF commitments, but also the company's progress towards them. I think as well, any investors should be able to have the capacity to help address non-compliance for the commitments of any companies that they invest in, because compliance is often a prerequisite for investment. So it's important that any kind of non-compliance, there are mechanisms and engagements between investors and the companies to help sort of improve their performance towards the DCF commitments. And maybe actually lastly as well, I might kind of like to point towards kind of collaboration. Investors have plenty of opportunities with kind of companies in the agri-food supply chain, but there's also now kind of increasing opportunities to invest in collaboration at a landscape level. Companies will be operating together with different stakeholders in a particular region or jurisdiction or landscape. And there may be, regulatory requirements around that associated with that particular area. But there's also kind of great opportunities for companies to sort of collaborate on restorative efforts. And, if we're looking towards sort of 2030 and having, sort of deforestations that begin to be reversed by that point, these are the opportunities that investors should be looking to kind of get involved in now at this particular point, as not only does it, put them ahead of things like compliance, it also comes with these like reputational benefits. It sort of creates a far more sustainable sourcing environment, and as potentially there's also capital opportunities to be found as well. So I'll just leave it there and maybe open it up to other panel members if they would like to comment.
Would anyone else like to come in on the point of the role of investors? Yep, Reyes, because I'll pick up on the point of collaboration afterwards, but Reyes, if you want to go on to the investors.
I just want to highlight the comment that Ida Grenbury just did on the Q&A. She's also been part of the technical working group, working with indigenous farming community, Indonesian farming communities on palm oil and other commodities. And she's pointing to the role of investors in supporting those more vulnerable communities in getting up to speed with the traceability requirements and so on and so forth. So I think it's a very important point that investors can also increase the capacity building and the necessary systems in those regions where is mostly needed for them to come into place. This is one part of, as I mentioned before, on the human rights and opportunities for capacity building and investing there, but it's a crucial part if we want this transition to happen, not only from the top to the bottom, but also from the ground up. I just wanted to leave it there. Thank you.
And it's an important point. One of the things that the EUDR is being criticised for at the moment, and one of the challenges with the EUDR is supporting these smallholder actors to understand the requirements and to meet the requirements, particularly in things like the cocoa and the coffee value chains. And one of the things I was going to finish on was with the role of investors in this space. Agriculture has a lot of bank lending. So more so than bonds, in a way, it's an active bank engagement. And one of the things that we'd really like to see is deforestation and conversion-free criteria being included and embedded in bank lending criteria. And another aspect of this would be a requirement from the banks for those companies that they're investing in, because it often won't be the smallholders at the end of the chain, but for those companies to have an active engagement and support mechanism for the smallholders, so that they're not simply maybe switching between smallholders or switching between their suppliers to those who can meet the requirements, but actively supporting those supply chain actors to meet the requirements. We've just got we've literally got 3 minutes left, and we've got 2 more questions that have come in on the chat. So I'll park my collaboration point and go to the Q&A questions, if that's okay, for these last couple of minutes. So a question from Guido Balestrieri, and I expect this one is for you, Reyes, which is, what would be the process to become certified, and would the certification cover all of the previous steps in the supply chain until the producer? So that's a really good question. Depending on where the entity is that's getting issued, does it cover everything right down to the production level?
So the answer to the second part of the question is yes. So it covers all the steps. Basically, the traceability needs to get to the point of production, if it is a high risk, or to the country if it is a low risk or production facility. So yes, the retailer, for example, will need to be able to track the commodities they are then putting out for the consumers to the level where it was produced. And this is done through the traceability, through the geolocation data, and then checking that with systems providers and technology like what Caroline is doing in terms of checking that the deforestation did not take place after 2020. So that's the kind of all the documentation that needs to be provided. In terms of how an entity can get certified, Climate Bonds provides the certification and checks all the verification documentation evidence. This documentation of evidence is done through a approved verifier. So Climate Bonds have a list of, I think it's more than 70 approved verifiers for different sectors. It could be specific on this case for the land use. Those approved verifiers work with the entity in helping them provide all the necessary information that is needed for the criteria requirements. And then Climate Bonds will check those, work with the approved verifiers and the entity to make sure that everything is aligned, and then the certification will be issued. The certification on this particular criteria and on others for entity is valid for 5 years, but still information needs to be provided annually, because there might be changes in the supply chain and so on. So annually, we need to check that all the information is in place. But the process is get in touch with Climate Bonds, certification department, work with an approved verifier. Once all the documentation of evidence is in place, then the certification can be issued.
Great. So we literally have 1 minute left. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'll just super quick summary, 1 minute summary of what I have heard today, that deforestation and conversion free agriculture is critical to be meeting our climate goals. We cannot meet our climate goals of keeping the world within 1.5 degree of warming with deforestation rates continuing at the pace they are. Everybody and all countries in the world need to improve their deforestation due diligence. There are policy initiatives happening in various jurisdictions. We have the regulatory initiative in the EU with the EUDR. There's a number of policy initiatives that Dr. Ju mentioned in China as well. So there's an increasing push and requirement for companies who are the actors involved in all of this to be making sure that they do understand what they're buying, where the commodities that they're buying, where they come from, what the risk associated with those commodities are, and how to reduce those risks. There's a lot of guidance coming out, not least from Climate Bonds in the shape of these deforestation and conversion-free sourcing criteria. There's also guidance from organizations like the AFI and Rainforest Alliance, as well as increasing numbers of tools and technologies such as Caroline's company, NADAR, that are providing the solutions in this space. So it's a really exciting place to be working in. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of progress, huge amount still to be done. But with that, I will say thank you very much to all of our panelists today, and I look forward to seeing the criteria when they come out. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Looking forward for continuing on this space. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. See
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye.